G'day all, it's Edo from the Elite Pathways page. This is going to be the first of a two-part series where I'm going to look at the roster, the current roster, the finalised top 30 for 2023, and also how it's shaping up in 2024, how many spots are remaining, who's been signed, recent signings and players who are off contract, all that sort of stuff. So firstly, we're going to look at the finalised 2023 top 30, which we just had to finalise at the start of August. Every club had to finalise their top 30, and so that gives us a good look at what we've currently got. There's been a little bit of movement within our squad over the season really. Players shuffling on and coming in and coming out of the top 30. New Brown was the last to leave, and Liam Knight was the last one to come in. And that finalised the 30, and we're going to look at that. So a lot of people know that I'm a bit sort of a nerd when it comes to the roster. I like to keep track of, who we've got in our top 30. I don't think it's well publicised in any medium, including the NRL and the Bulldogs official site. Most of the NRL clubs' official sites are run by the same company, so it's not really that clear on who's actually in the top 30. So it's been like that for a number of years, and I decided that I'll create my own list, and I did it on a spreadsheet, just an Excel sheet, and I keep it up to date with any announcements that the club makes on players either coming in or going out. And it's also goes to the lower grades. I've done New South Wales Cup and Jersey Flegg, at least with their squad list, but obviously I don't know how long they're signed for. Not privy to that type of information, but it just keeps us up to date on who's coming through. So yeah, I like to keep that maintained as much as possible. And I still see a lot of people on the Facebook groups, they're a bit sort of unsure about who's in the top 30 and how many spots we've got remaining, and how do we afford so-and-so player. We keep buying players. How many players are we going to sign? It seems a bit ridiculous. But, if you do actually look at the top 30 and who's off contract and how many spots, then it makes a little bit more sense. And, yeah, so we're going to start there. The finalised top 30 for 2023. And so, obviously, I don't have any official list from the club about who's in the top 30, or do I get to have a look at the contracts of players in the top 30 and what's stipulated in their contracts? So I have no idea. This is just going off doing my own research on player announcements in the media, looking at data on various websites, including the NRL site, and yeah, it's my at least then I can say it's my own work and I've got no one else to blame if I've got anything wrong. But look, it does appear to be our top 30 to finish the year off. So before I look at the 2024 roster and how that's shaping up, which I'll do in the next episode, going to look at how we got to the 30 players finalised for this year and the player movements that we've had over the course of the season and in pre-season. I won't go any before that. There's no point. And I think there's been 11 sort of notable movements. And it started off with signing Carl Oluwapu from Brisbane. Would have been part of his contract to be in the top 30. And we had Josh Reynolds on a train and trial in pre-season, and he was added into the top 30. Biondi Odo, who was in the top 30 but had a long injury layoff, where it looked like he was going to be out for the whole season, but he ended up coming back halfway through, and he was taken out of the top 30, and Reece Hoffman went in and that was prior to round one. We saw Reece Hoffman walk out with the players in the season launch when the 30 players came out. So that was 30 players at that point. And then after about 2 months, we saw 2 players leave. New signing, Andrew Davey, who had initially signed for 2 years. He didn't last 2 months, and he went back to his former club, the Eels. And Brandon Clark, who was elevated into the top 30, was let go, and he went back home to Queensland, and I believe he's back at the Capras where he was before, back home. So that's 28 players we were now at that point. We signed Ethan Kai Ward, centre winger from Brisbane, so back to 29. And then Biondi Odo, who was training well and rehabilitating well, he was reinstated into the top 30. So we're back at 30 spots. Then we retired Josh Reynolds, so 29, and we were able to sign Toby Sexton, which put us back to 30. And then in the last few weeks, we signed Liam Knight from South. So we're at 31, and New Brown was let go to the Knights. Back to 30, and that's where we finish up. So breaking the squad down, and I've done it into groups because it's just easier that way. And, you know, the way the game is played these days, you need players to be playing in a number of positions for differing reasons. And, you know, those reasons are, you know, injuries to the team, sin bins, suspensions. You need to be able to, a player needs to be able to cover more than one position. And I think, you know, keeping the backs, obviously there's some backs that can play forwards and forwards that can play backs and etc. This is probably the best way to do it from a healthy point of view. If you're going into the season and you expect everyone to be healthy and you want everyone healthy, then, you know, you have to look at the main positions of each player. And so I've got 9 players in the outside backs, finalised in the top 30, and they're Hayes Perham, Josh Adokar, Jacob Carraz, Jake Averillo, who's since been signed by the Dolphins, Paul Alamotti, Braden Burns and Declan Casey, who are all still off contract, and Gerald Skelton, and last of all, centre winger Ethan Kai Ward. Now looking at the halves and the hooker positions, vital areas of the spine. We've got Matt Burton, Toby Sexton, Kyle Flanagan, who's still off contract, Reid Marnie, Carl Oluwapu, and the reinstated into the top 30, Bailey Biondi-Odo. So those 6 players go with the 9 of the outside backs, and that's half of our top 30. Onto the middle forwards. I actually have 10 players as middle forwards. And this, you know, covering prop, lock, and, you know, bench middles. They may have played a little bit of edge throughout the year, such as Fatala Mariner and Pangai Jr., but predominantly they're middle forwards and being used that way. Max King, Tavita Pangai Jr., Ryan Sutton, Luke Thompson off contract, Franklin Pele, Chris Patolo, Sam Hughes, Raymond Fatala Mariner, Jaden Ockenbaugh, another one that's been used a little bit on the edge, and Liam Knight, the last signing. Next up, the edge forwards. So there was only 5 spots remaining after those 10 middles that were named, and so 25 to 30 spots in the roster. I've got Viliami Kikau, Jacob Preston, who those two are obviously the starting second rowers that, we want to go with each week. Corey Waddell, who's played a bit of middle and a bit of edge, started and come off the bench. He's off contract. Jackson Tapine and Reece Hoffman, who hasn't yet. I think he's the only one out of the top 30 that hasn't played this season besides Biondiato. So that's 30. So outside of the top 30, we've used 5 players. Blake Wilson, Khaled Rajab, Harrison Edwards, who's been used quite a fair bit, as has Curtis Moran, and Jaden Tanner has played a couple of games, I believe, early on in the year. So those 5 players, not part of the top 30, on second-tier contracts, and they've contributed to playing in the NRL side this year. So for those that do follow Gus on his Twitter, and I'm one of them, I think it's good that Gus does that on his Twitter, because we don't really hear too much about what's happening within the club, or not enough for my liking anyway, but he's good when it comes to sharing information about what's happening within the club, and I'm sure a lot of Dogs fans like that side of things. But he did say that he made an offer to Harrison Edwards and Blake Wilson, and that Curtis Moran had agreed to terms, but nothing has been made official yet. So we'll just have to wait and see with those 3 players. And over the next, there's only 2 games left in the season. I'm sure we're going to hear more about players that will be departing. Usually that happens in the last week or the week just after the season finishes, where players will be announced as leaving, or they'll start signing at other clubs. So those players that are still off contract, or whether they do actually get a contract or a second-tier contract, or players that are still signed for next year, will be in fact moving on early, which might happen. And we've seen a little bit in the media about a couple of players in particular where they could be moving on, so we'll just have to wait and see there. And then that'll lead into part 2, which I'll probably do just after the season finishes, and we'll look at 2024 roster. And so, yeah, that's going to wrap up part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Look, I know a lot of it's pretty, self-explanatory, and a lot of people are already aware of what our top 30 is, but I think it's just a good way to outline where we're at the moment before we do look at next year, and what's happened throughout the year and got us to this point. So anyway, I'd like to, thank you all for watching the video, if you did watch it, or subscribing and liking. I appreciate that. It's totally up to you. I'd like to thank Benny as well, for Benny Hassum, for doing a lot of the artwork on the pictures. They look fantastic. I appreciate the help, mate. And so I'll talk to you in the usual bark, the weekly episode coming up, and then after the season, we'll look at 2024. Okay, thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later. Thanks, bye.